There are a lot of people that are very passionate about yeast. Maybe not what you're thinking about. I'm talking about baker's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. I share some of that enthusiasm. Why? Well, this is actually part 6 of my review on David Sinclair's book, Lifespan. He has a chapter in there called Yeast of Eden. I'm having a blast doing this series because for those of you who may have seen a few of my videos, you know that I've covered most of these topics. There is a lot of longevity, lifespan, anti-aging in what I do. I'm a preventive medicine doc. I prevent disease. In order to do that, we don't want to just peck away, use whack-a-mole and try to hit heart disease here and kidney disease over here and dementia over here. We want to go back 20 years when the process starts on a molecular basis. Molecular activities, genetics, epigenetics. And now we're starting to get to the issue of baker's yeast and epigenetics. The story starts with a fellow named Robert Mortimer. He was a collector of mutant Saccharomyces cerevisiae, mutant baker's yeast. Now, what did that get him? Well, he actually provided these mutant baker's yeasts at no cost to researchers throughout the world. And according to Sinclair, the result, this started way back in the 50s, and the result of providing these mutant variations of baker yeast throughout the research world resulted in yeast researching blooming. But it wasn't just yeast research. I may have shared with you, I got, about 3/4 of the way through a remote training program at Stanford in genetics. A lot of what we studied in genetics was based on work originally done with baker's yeast. Why is that? Well, here's an example. Those ERC loops that David Sinclair mentions many times, these things that are these loops of wild DNA that have just gotten unpacked and have not been repacked and are getting translated and transcribed, like the demented pianist. He actually demonstrated those ERC loops within Saccharomyces cerevisiae, baker's yeast. Again, if you haven't seen that video, the demented pianist uses an analogy. It's an analogy that he's talking about where, imagine you go to a concert, you start to hear an occasional note that shouldn't have been there. At first it doesn't bother you, but then more and more and more until it's just a total chaos. Well, that's what happens with the information theory of aging. That's a theory that Sinclair's taken credit for developing, and I think appropriately so. Basically what's going on is that you're getting junk, maybe not junk DNA, but you have DNA that is not getting packed. He talks about a Werner mutant, where the Werner syndrome folks age very rapidly. By 40 years old, they appear to be 60 or 80 years old. And again, if you look at their DNA were madly unpacking like a vacuum-sealed bag of yarn that had been ripped open. So back to Saccharomyces, baker's yeast. Sinclair talked a lot about baker's yeast in his book. If you go back and you read Valter Longo's book, The Longevity Diet, he's done a heck of a lot of work with those yeast as well and spent a lot of time talking about those yeast. Longo's perspective was a little bit different. He wanted to look at the impact of starvation or caloric restriction on these yeast, and he demonstrated you doubled their lifespan if you decreased their sugar intake. In other words, if you put them on caloric restriction. You gave them sugar and they had early aging and death. It activated genes that were specific in terms of inflammation. So, it's not just yeast though. There are a lot of animals that have similarities in terms of the DNA processes of aging. Yeast, fungus, molds, insects, fruit flies have been used a lot. You remember, anybody that studied high school Mendelian genetics probably got to the point where they're talking about fruit flies. And speaking of Mendelian genetics, he was using plants, some kind of pea, garden pea, I think. There are worms. The roundworm is a very, very commonly used genetic model for aging. Mice and rats obviously have been used a lot. All of those looking to help improve human health, help us understand the similarities with our genetic components and our aging processes. So, short video, wanted to just talk a little bit though about the yeast of Eden in David Sinclair's book, Lifespan. Thank you for your interest. If plaque is the #1 cause of heart attack, stroke, dementia, blindness, kidney disease, you'd think we'd know how to evaluate it, screen for it, wouldn't you? Unfortunately, the state of the art right now is a guess, and a bad one at that, Framingham. The most common thing that you do is you say, well, hey doc, why don't we do a stress test? They don't work either. Then you go into the cath lab and get a definitive test, but that involves getting a needle in the groin. It just goes downhill from there. Now, there are better ways. Take a look at our plaque evaluation course. Click the link below.